Okay, I think we're good.
Okay. So welcome everybody to today's pop-up webinar on the Farm Bill. My name is Melissa Johnson. I am the State Policy Director at National Skills Coalition. And we have a number of our partners here on the phone, but for those of you all who may not be as familiar with our work, we are a broad-based coalition of many different organizations, education and training organizations, business and advocacy organizations, as well as individuals, all working toward a vision of an America that grows its economy by investing in its people so that every worker in every industry has the skills that they need to compete and prosper. We are especially interested in the Farm Bill because of the provisions for SNAP employment and training, SNAP, of course, being the nation's largest food assistance program. And this effort today is our part in giving you our initial takes on the Farm Bill that has recently passed both the House and the Senate and is awaiting President Trump's signature. We currently have an analysis on our website, and part of that analysis shows you that this bipartisan bill rejects expanded work requirements for SNAP that had been included in the House proposal released in April and provides a modest funding increase for SNAP employment and training. So the goal of this discussion will be to discuss the importance of the Farm Bill to workforce development advocates, some highlights of what we actually got out of the Farm Bill, and the work that is still ahead of us in terms of this law's implementation, particularly for SNAP EMT. You all are currently on mute as attendees, but there is a place where you can see, and should be at the bottom of your screen, where you can, a Q&A box where you can type in questions. So feel free to type those during our discussion, and we will answer those questions at the end. And also there's a chat option in case you are having any technical difficulties. So with all of that introduction laid out here, I want to introduce our panelists. Today we have with us Kermit Kaliba, who's the Federal Policy Director for National Skills Coalition. We have Carrie Desjardins. She is a policy associate for the Center for Employment and Economic Wellbeing at the American Public Human Services Association, and Stacy Dean, who's the Vice President for Food Assistance Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We're so glad to have these experts with us. And we're going to kick off the discussion with Kermit. Kermit, just to start with some quick background, why should workforce development advocates care about the Farm Bill?
All right, thanks, Melissa. And let me add to that how thrilled I am to be on this panel with Carrie and Stacy. We really appreciate their partnership, and we've really enjoyed working with them on this Farm Bill reauthorization journey. So from a workforce development perspective, as you laid out in your introduction, the main focus for National Skills Coalition and I think for other workforce advocates has been the SNAP program, which is one of the largest programs included in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is a large piece of legislation that's usually reauthorized every 5 years and includes a range of different agricultural programs or programs under the Department of Education. But obviously the SNAP program is the one that we are most focused on as workforce development advocates. And SNAP is important for two reasons. One, of course, SNAP in and of itself as a work support. So there are millions of low-income workers and families, college students and others who rely on SNAP benefits to help make ends meet and to help succeed in the labor market or succeed in education and training, make sure that they have the assistance that they need in order to support themselves while participating in work or training. And so obviously SNAP is an important program for National Skills Coalition as an important support program. But then there's also, as you mentioned, the SNAP E&T program. And for folks on the call who may not be familiar, I won't go through the entire program and every detail of SNAP E&T, but as a broad overview, every state is required by law under SNAP to offer what's called an E&T program, an employment and training program. States get dedicated funding. It's a formula grant that comes down every year. It's about $90 million a year spread across all 50 states. So it's not a lot of money, but it is a little bit of money. And states are required to offer programs that include a range of different, that can include a range of different components, from job search to work experience to vocational training and other activities. States have a lot of discretion in terms of what activities they do offer. So there are a number of states that really do put a lot of energy into high quality vocational training and post-secondary education. There are other states where the programs are less robust. But it is, as I say, it's a program that every state is required to offer as part of their overall SNAP program. Yeah, I think for advocates in our network, there's another element of SNAP E&T, which is generally referred to as the 50-50 program. So states and other stakeholders, third-party providers, can draw down federal reimbursement funding for administrative expenses and other costs related to the operation of SNAP employment and training components, or training components that are aimed at SNAP recipients. And that's really been an increasingly important tool for workforce development and higher education professionals. Over the course of the past 10 years, we've seen a real explosion in innovation and opportunity around the use of those funds to help build out high quality employment and training programs in a range of different states. And so when we think about the Farm Bill, NSC's priority going into the reauthorization process was to make sure that SNAP E&T was that we continued to build on the successes of SNAP E&T coming out of the last reauthorization back in 2014, but also making sure that we were preserving SNAP as an overall program, because, as we know, there are a lot of low-income workers and other individuals who are benefiting from those benefits, and we wanted to make sure that folks were continuing to receive those benefits while they continued to be in the labor market or in other forms of education. So that's kind of what, from a workforce perspective, I think is useful to know, or interesting, or to know about the Farm Bill and what we were looking for when we came into this conversation.
Awesome, great. Stacy, for the interim budget, what were some of the key concerns or priorities that you all had coming into the reauthorization process for the Farm Bill?
Wow, Melissa, it's funny, the Farm Bill process started probably more than a year ago. So reflecting back, I think we were most concerned, and I should say I have been, doing research on and analysis on and advocating for SNAP for over 20 years. And I think the thing we were most fundamentally worried about was that SNAP's strengths, all of the ways that it helps tens of millions of Americans every day to put food on the table, just wouldn't be a part of the conversation, that the policy would be oriented incorrectly towards SNAP being a flawed program. And that was largely the tenor coming out of the White House, because we had a couple of budgets from them that had proposed deep cuts in the program. And we were very concerned that House Agriculture Committee Chairman Conaway would take, I think, a partisan and just an approach that was oriented towards cuts and suggesting that the program didn't support work, right? And pursuing work requirements, and I guess we'll talk about what those are in a second, instead of smarter, more informed investments in job training. SNAP does support people in work. It helps propel people towards opportunity. Kids who receive it do better in the workforce. And its employment and training program offers a lot of opportunity to connect low-income people to job training. That was the path we wanted to see, but we were deeply concerned, and we ended up, I think our fears played out, that it was at least the House Farm Bill ended up being about cuts, structural change, and blaming participants for not being able to find work and, frankly, for being poor.
Yes, that's a great reminder about how SNAP supports work and how it's important for all workers. Both you and Kermit mentioned that. Carrie, for APHSA, what were some of the key concerns and priorities you all had coming into the reauthorization process?
Well, Stacey really took a lot of the words right out of my mouth there. We were definitely concerned that the strengths and the positive aspects of the SNAP program would not really be much of a part of the conversation, and we would much more be playing defense this year. And that did turn out to be the situation. As far as kind of the content of the Farm Bill and what our top priorities were, our most obvious priority was just updating and improving upon the SNAP E&T program, as well as protecting the ways in which the SNAP program more broadly just currently supports work and helps households build economic capacity. We also were hoping to see some elements of program simplification and administrative modernization. And then SNAP is one of the most highly regulated and strictly overseen programs when it comes to metrics like benefit accuracy and timeliness. And we were concerned coming into the Farm Bill process that we might be looking at changes to program integrity that might just be plain unreasonable due to just some things that have happened over the past several years. And that did turn out to be the case, at least certainly with the House Farm Bill. So I think those were kind of our four main areas that we were focusing on.
Awesome. So all of you all kind of alluded to where the House started out in the Farm Bill discussions, but we also saw that the final Farm Bill passed by pretty wide bipartisan margins, and that outcome, of course, wasn't inevitable given where the House started. So I wonder, Stacey, if you could talk a little bit more about, go into more detail about the differences between where the House and the Senate started and how that kind of developed.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think it's important to remember that the nutrition title, or the title of the Farm Bill that reauthorizes SNAP, or food stamps as I sometimes still call it, as well as a couple of other nutrition-based programs, is only one of, I think, 13 titles. So the Farm Bill is an incredibly complex piece of legislation that covers subsidies to farmers, conservation programs, research, trade policy. So there's a lot going on, and the House bill was viewed, I guess it received only Republican votes. I think it passed by a 2 or 3 vote margin, and was considered relatively controversial across the spectrum, not every part of the bill, but across many aspects of farm and nutrition policy. Specifically in the nutrition title, it proposed deep cuts, benefit cuts to SNAP. About 2 million people would have either been, or I think would have been removed from the program by cutting back on eligibility, and other groups would have seen their benefits cut. And in addition, the biggest change that the House proposed that I think that's relevant to this audience is that it said basically all working age adults had to be doing something 20 hours a week, unless they had small children or were disabled. But this very large definition of millions of people on the program had to be working or participating in job training 20 hours a week or they would lose their benefits. And that needed to happen the month after they started participating in the program. So there was this concept that there's this unlimited bounty of job training and education slots out there in the universe that you all are operating that would have just been ready to absorb 5 to 6 million people. And if those folks missed a day or didn't file a piece of paperwork, or if folks in your network didn't file a piece of paperwork, they would lose access to food assistance, and the penalties were extremely punitive. And I just really want to call out the National Skills Coalition for just doing a phenomenal job at educating members about how, in fact, we have a deficit of quality job training, not a surplus. And Kermit, I'm sure, can talk more about that. So it was a highly problematic bill, and many of us came together, the states, job training providers, advocacy groups, to say this is not the right pathway forward. The Senate, in contrast, took a bipartisan approach. It was a more studied approach. It was based on evidence. They focused a lot on program integrity issues and also on job training. They wanted to link the SNAP's employment and training program more to workforce. They wanted to make new investments, and they wanted those investments to be informed by the pilot programs that are currently being operated and studied for impact. So it was just a wildly different approach, and the Senate bill did pass with bipartisan support and with a wide margin too. So heading into conference, we had two very different approaches, which I think did spark a robust public debate. And I'll stop there.
Awesome. So Carrie and Kermit, I know that you all may want to give some more comments about the differences between the House and the Senate approach from your perspective. And I guess let's start with Kermit.
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, and Stacy did a great job, I think, of sort of laying out the distinctions between the House and the Senate approach. And I do think, yeah, there was a really, if nothing else came out of that, the two competing approaches, one of the things I think it did do a good job of surfacing was the importance of education and training opportunities for SNAP recipients. I mean, it's worth noting the House, as they were expanding the work requirements for this broad range of individuals, they also did propose significantly increasing the funding for the state E&T formula grant program from $90 million a year to $1 billion a year. Now that was not nearly sufficient from our perspective, given the breadth of individuals who would need services under this new expanded program. But I do think it does speak to, and both the House and the Senate, one thing that is fair to say, I think, is that both the House and the Senate did see coming out of this, the value of education and training, and took different paths to it, but certainly the importance of education and training, at least in today's economy, where we know that so many jobs do require some form of post-secondary education in order to get into family supporting employment. I think the only other thing I'd add is, again, and I want to give a lot of credit to Center on Budget and APHSA and others, it does show that there is even in a divided Congress, and this was a hotly contested bill right down to the end, but even in a divided Washington, there is bipartisan support for a lot of the programs that we work on, and I think it speaks to the power of our voices as advocates. I know it wasn't just national groups like ours. There were a lot of folks out in the field, folks who are part of our network, part of Center on Budget's network, members of APHSA who weighed in with Congress. And I think, the fact that we ended out with a bill that did have such bipartisan support when it finally passed speaks to the fact that your voices still do matter. And so I hope that as we head into the next Congress, we'll continue to stay engaged on these issues.
And Carrie, additional comments on your end? I promise I'm coming to you next first. I'm giving you the negative part of going last year, but I'm going to come to you first next time.
No problem. I think Stacy and Kermit both covered almost everything. The only thing that I would add is that from APHSA's perspective, we work with SNAP directors, but we also work with state child care administrators and state child welfare administrators. And so when we read the House Farm Bill with the very dramatic changes that they propose making to those who would be required to participate in work activities, by opening that up to folks, to parents or caregivers of school-aged children, that's a huge number of people, and that's also a huge number of children who would then need childcare. I think that if the assumption was that those parents would be able to work while their children are in school, then that's a very flawed assumption, particularly for folks who would be low-income workers or who have low skills. So we were very concerned that in spite of dramatically expanding work requirements, there was no mention of childcare. We feel you cannot talk about work without talking about childcare, and so I just wanted to point that out.
That's an extremely important point. Thank you so much for that. To Kermit, we kind of touched on this a bit already, but I want to know if you want to just reiterate or go into more detail on the main changes for SNAP eligibility and SNAP ENT under the final Farm Bill, and whether or not you believe these are good changes or bad changes.
Sure, and I'll just touch on a couple of things. I won't go through the whole list. I know that Stacy and Carrie have some elements that they'd like to comment on as well. So I think from the areas that National Skills Coalition has focused on, one of the key top lines for us was that the 50-50 reimbursement program, the funding structure that a number of our state and local partners have been using to expand high quality training, largely stay the same. And so that was a good thing. I think it gives for those programs and partners who are utilizing the 50-50 funds to build out programming, then if nothing else, the Farm Bill does allow those activities to continue and creates additional opportunities. So that's a good thing. In terms of other big changes, so one change, of course, was there was an increase in the formula funding that goes to states. So we're going from $90 million a year to about $104 million a year, and that's a good thing. More money is generally a good thing, although it's important to note that that's still relatively little funding on a state-by-state basis. So, back in FY15, there were 10 states that got less than $300,000. There were 21 states that got less than $1 million to support their programs. It's not really at a state level. That's not really enough to build out the kind of robust programming that you'd like to see, and that puts a lot of constraints on states. So while we're certainly happy to see an increase in funding, it also does not do a lot. It doesn't probably do enough to support states really doing good work. I think another major change was there were changes in the categories of activities that could count as SNAP ENT components. So there was the elimination of job search as an allowable component, and I know Stacy has some thoughts on that. There was also the addition of language around apprenticeship and subsidized jobs as allowable activities, which we think is a good thing. Those are both strategies that we know our state and local partners utilize effectively. There's also the addition of a new category of activity called what are called workforce partnerships. And this is kind of an interesting category of activity. So these are training programs that are offered by private employers or eligible training providers under WIOA that offer at least 20 hours of work in training and other activities that can count towards that can be counted as ENT components. It's a little unclear how this provision is going to work out. One thing that's noteworthy about this is that workforce partnerships, believe it or not, eligible to receive SNAP ENT funds, and so it's unclear how that's going to be manifested. But I think that's an important. There is definitely an expansion and updating of the components that can be included as part of the state's ENT program. So, and then the other thing I'll just flag is Stacey had alluded to pilot programs. The 2014 reauthorization did include $200 million for pilot programs, state-level pilot programs that have been out for a couple of years now. There was a proposal in the Senate bill to continue funding for pilots, but that language was not carried forward into the final Farm Bill. So there is not a continuation of those. There's not new funding for pilot grants, although there. So there's not. Yeah. So that's another change that is unfortunate. And I'll stop there.
Yes. So those are a number of good changes, but then a number of changes that are disappointing or are less than optimal. Just a reminder to the attendees, you can submit your questions through that Q&A box. So feel free to do that as our panelists are talking. So this is when I come to Carrie first. I want to come to Carrie to talk about your reactions to those changes in the Farm Bill.
As far as especially the changes to SNAP employment and training and kind of the work element of the SNAP program, honestly, we're still talking to our members and figuring out what the ultimate impact of those changes is going to be. I think that, you know, some of the new activities that will count, we're happy to see those. We believe that those are meaningful activities. I think it's just states are going to have a lot of work ahead of them to update their SNAP employment and training state plans before their next plan is due. And I mean, they are significant changes, particularly for states who are still, I mean, for a long time, a lot of states really weren't doing a whole lot with their SNAP employment and training program because we were in a recession. And so, you know, a lot of states are still learning and growing. And so to make some significant changes in the midst of this will be a challenge. So we're still kind of exploring how it'll all play out. I think a lot of it will, in many ways, it will also depend on the administration and regulations that they set.
That's true, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But Stacey, reactions to changes to SNAP ENT and SNAP eligibility more broadly in the final Farm Bill.
So I guess my first main reaction was relief on the final Farm Bill, that it really didn't include any of the harmful cuts or changes that we talked about with respect to the House bill. You know, Carrie and Kermit have given a good overview, a rundown of the changes. Maybe I'll just remark on a few that I think are worth the most immediate attention, just given their level of import. So additional funds is great, and that would be one area of disappointment, was that we didn't see greater investment in the kinds of programs that folks in the Skills Coalition Network provide. That would have been ideal, but it's not where we ended up. I think the fact, as Carrie said and Kermit said, states will have to change their plans because they can't do unsupervised job search anymore, and that is a very large component of where states spend money. So I would say, while we didn't see a lot of new money from the federal level, given that states spend a very significant portion of their current grant on job search, which is now no longer an allowable activity unless it's a supervised program, and all of that is yet to be defined, it does mean that states will have states that are doing job search will have to come identify new places to spend that money within their employment and training program. And I really hope that folks in the Skills Network and anti-hunger advocates are engaged with states quickly to say, you know, you've got a larger grant and we have some money that is now can't be spent on what it's spent on. So let's talk about how to make that effective and how we can help you with that. So that's very notable. There are some new things, as Kermit said, that they can do. They have to include a case management component, at least for some of their programs, so that will be interesting to see what happens there. And the law leans into, although it sort of, you know, it doesn't demand, that they also think about programming for individuals with particular barriers, like individuals with disabilities, older workers, homeless folks. And so I think that is also just a really ripe moment to open a conversation with about what is our ENT program trying to accomplish? What do these new changes drive us towards that goal? And also, what are the kinds of innovative programming out there in the community now that states could leverage? It's a very quick timeline, though, because by October 1st of this coming year, states have to be implemented, and I assume they have to get their ENT plans in sometime this summer. So we'll all want to, so I'm sorry, I kind of morphed from what was in it to where to go. I apologize, Melissa, but I think that's, I think that this is a wonderful opening for people in the workforce and education space to be engaging with their SNAP employment and training directors on giving them information about different opportunities. So I'll stop there.
No, that's quite all right, Stacey. You gave us a segue into where we were going, and that is what should workforce advocates be doing to support implementation? And I'll just say that we've gotten a couple questions through the Q&A box. So we'll talk a little bit about implementation. If Carrie and Kermit want to comment on that a little bit, Stacey, because you've kind of already given us where to go there. And then we'll answer one more question, and then we'll get to our Q&A. So Carrie and Kermit, any other comments you want to add about supporting implementation? And we can start with Carrie again.
So I would just really encourage advocates to reach out to your SNAP ENT managers in your state. Like I said, a lot of folks are still working on growing their programs. So, you know, if you're not already connected with them, please do, you know, take a proactive approach and reach out to them and explore ways that you all might be able to work together. I also want to mention one thing that we've noticed is that in some states, not only do we think it's great for the SNAP ENT program to be working closely with workforce development, but also a number of states have departments of commerce, which sometimes include initiatives around workforce training. And so that's another place, you know, if you work in that area, please know that that your expertise is also very valued. And so, you know, just because you don't work necessarily in workforce development, but if you're in continuing education or adult education, or you know, working for Department of Commerce or programs connected with those departments, please do reach out to your SNAP ENT folks in your state.
Yes, and Kermit?
Yeah, I'll just, I want to echo, you know, Stacey and Carrie's comments on this. I think this is, you know, the fact that we have the Farm Bill, you know, moving to the implementation phase really is, it's an exciting opportunity. I know, you know, one of the things that we've really tried to emphasize is strengthening alignment between different education and training programs at the state and local level. And actually, one thing I neglected to mention when I was talking about changes to the Farm Bill and to SNAP ENT is, you know, there's now a new requirement that as states are developing their SNAP ENT plan, that they do so in consultation with the state workforce board or with private employers to make sure that they are aiming their ENT programs at jobs and occupations that are in demand in the state and local economies. And that's, you know, that's not necessarily requiring coordinated planning. It doesn't necessarily require that states submit, the combined plans that folks are familiar with under the WIOA provisions. But I do think that is a strong signal about the importance of making sure that SNAP agencies, other human service agencies, workforce professionals, higher education, adult education, that there's an opportunity here as states are thinking about their SNAP plans. And I should note, we also have states are also going to be in the process of redoing their WIOA state plans next spring, and they're also going to be in the process of starting to work on their new Perkins plans next year. So there is really kind of a set of opportunities where advocates can be weighing in across a range of different programs, and making sure that those programs are coordinated and aligned in a way that actually that delivers high quality education and training services for the participants that we're serving. So I think as Stacey and Carrie have said, I think this is a really useful opportunity, but it is also an opportunity that won't happen by itself. It does mean that we really do, as a community, have to do what we can to make it happen. I will say one thing that came up in some of the conversations we were having on the Hill around the reauthorization process. There were a number of states that where members didn't see a lot of activity in their state, and they weren't hearing from the advocacy community, and they didn't necessarily see ENT as a high priority. And I think that it's important as we think about 5 years from now, when we're rethinking the Farm Bill, that we have some results to show from this reauthorization, that we're taking advantage of the opportunities that we have. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. So we've talked about of course, the Farm Bill and that legislation extensively. Related to that, of course, is administrative action, and I know that we're expecting some administrative action within the next day or so, particularly around the work rules within SNAP. I wonder, Stacey, if you wanted to give a brief overview of the administrative action we're expecting and that folks should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Actually, can we break this into two parts, Melissa? First, let's just, can we just say what we expect to hear from FNS on the ENT changes in the Farm Bill? If that's okay with you, do you mind if I do that first?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, great. I realized I should have mentioned that. So just so folks know, USDA and FNS are typically really good about getting out a quick memo to states that outlines their plans for implementing the provisions, right? So there are a whole bunch of provisions in this SNAP, that affect SNAP, and some of them will be sort of self-executing, easy to do. Some of them require policy and regulations, and I'm sure that they will very soon have guidance out about implementation and the changes in ENT and how it interacts with their state plans and expectations for what they do. So we should all be on the lookout for that. And I saw, I'm sure states will, as they start to think about this and as they interact with you all, will have tons of questions. And they submit those questions to their regional offices, and then USDA incorporates those and responds to them through Q&A or maybe in the instructions they put out for their state plans. So it can be a frustrating process because it always feels slower to us than we want it to be, and it can be a little iterative, but it is part of the collaborative rollout of the rules. So, and I don't expect anything would be different in this rollout. Separately, and just completely distinct from the Farm Bill, USDA has indicated to the Hill and to press that tomorrow they intend to publish a proposed rulemaking governing some of the rules that deal with one of the SNAP's eligibility rules, which has to do with the eligibility for childless individuals who aren't working 20 hours a week. They are generally subject to a time limit in SNAP. They can only receive benefits for 3 months out of 36. subject to a number of exemptions and conditions. And FNS signaled earlier this year that they wanted to put out some proposed policy changes on that, which we believe will likely expose more people to the 3-month time limit for a variety of reasons. So that's kind of alarming. We will see that rule, we think, tomorrow, and we can reflect more on what it will be, but this will be a bigger group of people that can't participate in SNAP unless they're working 20 hours a week or are enrolled in a qualifying job training program. So counter to what I just said about E&T having all of this opportunity, this policy change could mean that states feel an imperative to redeploy E&T job training dollars to serve the group of folks subject to the time limit, which is typically about making them eligible and not investing in them to help them get better jobs. So that's just a beware, and we and others will be putting out more information as it comes out, and we let you know. Sorry, did I get that? Kermit, you should edit, or Carrie, jump in with any clarifying information on that.
No, I think you did a good job of explaining. I will say, so for folks who are interested in learning more about this, I know that Center on Budget has done analysis of the, as Stacy mentioned, the administration put out sort of an advanced notice of this back in April. We had submitted comments, and I know other organizations submitted comments at that point. So if you're interested in learning more, just sort of getting ready for what we might see tonight or tomorrow, you can certainly take a look at that material. And of course, we'll be putting out our analysis of the proposal later this week once we've seen the final language. We're certainly disappointed to see this introduced. The president is expected to sign the Farm Bill tomorrow, and certainly given that it passed by such wide bipartisan margins, this was I think the most bipartisan Farm Bill that's been passed since the Great Depression is my understanding. To have this rule come out at the same time that this bipartisan piece of legislation is being passed, that runs so much counter to the spirit and the purpose of the legislation, I think is unfortunate. But certainly we will continue to keep the field informed about these changes or these proposed changes, and we'll certainly try to provide opportunities for folks in the field to weigh in on as part of that comment process.
Awesome. So we're going to try to wrap up here because we know we wanted to wrap up within about 45 minutes, given that we are in the week before the holiday. We have a couple of questions that we've received through the Q&A box, and we will answer those privately with the questioner. So if you all do have questions, feel free to reach out via the email that you received with the registration, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. And thank you so much for joining our webinar. We hope that you feel better informed not only about the Farm Bill, but the more recent changes that we're expecting within the next day or so. And thank you so much for all of our panelists for providing such great information.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.